Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. And I am so excited to be here with Mike Reardon, who is a Guinness Ambassador, a brewery ambassador. I had never even heard of this until I started looking into having a program for the history of Guinness. So I thought I'm going to have somebody from, Dublin, whatever. And then here comes Mike Reardon from from Lowell, Massachusetts. So I actually heard about him from the Guinness Brewery in Baltimore, and I didn't know there was that either. So I am learning a lot just from planning this. So before we get started, I just want to say thank you to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programs. I'd like to thank Mike for letting us share this program with other libraries. The limit on Zoom is 50, and guess how many libraries we have participating? 50. That's right. Yes, 50 libraries are sharing this program with their communities because it is of such interest. So very excited about that. So Mike has a presentation, a slideshow, which he will be sharing with you in just a sec. I will be turning the chat off during his slides, and then I'll turn it back on afterwards so you can chat with each other. If you have questions, though, please put them in the Q&A. It's the button at the bottom of your screen, of your Zoom screen, and that's where I'm going to take questions from because it's too hard sometimes to catch them all in the chat. So Mike Reardon, as I said, is a Guinness ambassador, a highly trained beer expert and storyteller who captivates Guinness lovers and audiences with beer, culinary, and cultural history of this fantastic beer. But I was talking to him a little bit before, and he has got the most amazing background. I hope he tells you a little bit about it because he's just done everything, not just in the beer world, but also in performing arts. So we're gonna have Mike the beer ambassador and Mike the storyteller and Mike the Lowellite, Lowellite, telling us everything that he knows about beer. Welcome so much, Mike. Thank you so much for doing this. I was so excited to be in conversation with you.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. I have no doubt. So yes, slides, and then I'm going to be off screen. I'll come back for questions afterwards.
Sure. Let's bring this up. Go back a few slides to the beginning. All right, guys, welcome. Thanks for coming out. I really appreciate it. Happy belated St. Patrick's Day. My name is Mike Reardon. I'm the Guinness Brewery Ambassador, one of two here in the United States. We always open up any kind of consumer-facing event we do with a simple message. Please be 21 plus if you're on the Zoom here, and please drink responsibly. A little bit about my background. I've been a Guinness Brewery Ambassador for almost 10 years. I've been in the beer industry for almost 2 decades. So I have a bachelor's degree in fine arts in theater. And what you do with that is you move to New York City and you become a bartender. And that's exactly what I did. And I loved beer. I was home brewing in my apartment, reading about beer. We had a lot of different brewery reps coming in trying to sell their products. And at a certain point, I thought I'd really love to be in the beer industry and talk about beer. Maybe I can kind of get my foot in the door using this hospitality experience. So I worked at a few brew pubs. I eventually worked at a larger regional brewery, some smaller craft breweries, mainly all in beer education, a little bit in beer quality and brewing. Um, and then eventually I got my dream job, which is to be a Guinness Brewery Ambassador about 10 years ago. I actually honeymooned with my wife in Ireland when we first got married. And I remember going to the Guinness storehouse and we were leaving there. I was like, imagine if I could work for Guinness. But this job, this role has only existed for 10 years. So at the time, it wasn't even possible for me to do what I'm doing now. You might see throughout this presentation that I'm really passionate about this stuff. I'm not a company man. I'm not blowing smoke. I really do love this beer. In fact, my first legal beer ever was Guinness Draft, was a pint of Guinness Draft. So anyway, so we're going to jump into this presentation. What we're going to do is Guinness history abridged because we have 265 plus years of history to cover. So it's impossible for us to cover anything, but hopefully what this does is kind of whets your palate, uh, gets you interested, gets you curious, so you can go out into the world and find out more about Guinness. Because there is, no matter what you're into, if it's marketing and advertising, if it's brewing science, if it's Irish history and culture, if it's music, if it's food, if it's athletics, you can find a way to use that to get into this topic and get into Guinness, which I think is fantastic. So let's get it started. The first thing I want to mention And we're going to go all the way back to the 1720s before Guinness was even a brewery. So Arthur Guinness actually started the brewery in 1759. One of the myths out there is that Arthur Guinness or the Guinness Brewery invented porter and stout. Well, they did not. This beer started in the 1720s in London. Porter was a beer that was brewed with a really inefficient style of malt called blown brown malt. And blown brown malt could either come off as too acrid and burnt or charred, or it could come off as really sweet and cloying. And because of that, when they were brewing this beer, they'd have to store it in giant wooden vats for up to 3 months for the beer to mellow out. What they didn't know back then was living in that wood was a wild yeast called Brettanomyces, British sugar fungus. British sugar fungus, Brettanomyces, can metabolize simple sugars, which brewer's yeast can. Ale and lager yeast can do that as well. But it can also metabolize complex sugars. So it can really mellow a beer out, add some funky flavors to it, take the edges off. Because of this aging process, the brewers had to build larger and larger production facilities to get enough product out to the market because of this 3 month long maturation process. So porter actually becomes the world's first industrialized style of beer. It was named after the people who drank it. Porters were guys who carried heavy stuff all around London from the docks. And they really loved this style of beer. And it became wildly popular, exported all over the world. And we'll tell a little bit about that story because a large part of that has to do with Guinness. And porter and stout are the same beer. They have the same origin story. And to this day, even if you look at the BJCP beer style guidelines, you'll notice there's a lot of overlap. One man's porter is another man's stout. In fact, initially, stout was just an adjective to describe porter. So you'd have porter X, porter double X. Your heaviest, strongest porters were called stout porter. So this all happens before our hero of the story, Arthur Guinness, even starts brewing and making beer. Porter was already a large brewing concern over in London with breweries like Whitbread and Barclay and Perkins. So throughout the presentation, I'll use the word porter and I'll use the word stout, almost interchangeable. So here's the man of the hour, Arthur Guinness, born 1725, passed away in 1803. Arthur Guinness's father probably taught him how to brew. So Arthur Guinness's father worked for the estate of the Archbishop of Cashel, the Archbishop Price. And back then, brewing was actually less of an industrial concern and more of an in-the-home concern, especially if you were running a large estate like an archbishop would have. You would brew ales so that when you had visitors and people staying over, you'd have ale to offer them. The beer at the time in Ireland, kind of the popular beer, would have been Irish red ale. So think about Smithwick's, which Smithwick's is also in our portfolio. But John Smithwick started brewing in Kilkenny, Ireland in 1710, long before the Guinness family started brewing in Dublin. So he probably learned the basics of brewing from brewing at the Archbishop Price's estate and learning that from his father. Eventually, he actually gets a small inheritance from the Archbishop of Cashel. He takes that money and he goes to Leixlips, Ireland, and he starts a small brewery. He starts to hone in his craft, and he decides he wants to go for the big time. So he actually moves to Dublin, 1759. He finds a small disused brewery at St. James's Gate. And the reason why we call it St. James's Gate is because Dublin started off as a Viking fort that evolved into an Irish city. And because of that, it was a walled city. So St. James's Gate was where all the kind of traders and merchants were allowed into the city. Eventually, after Arthur Guinness moves in and starts his brewery and other people started brewing and distilling there, it's kind of known as the brewing and distilling area of the city. St. James's Gate, it's right near Dolphins Bar as well, if you're familiar with the city. He signs a 9,000-year lease. That's really good rent control. 9,000 years, 64-acre property, small disused brewery. And he starts brewing there. And also with that lease, he got the water rights for that part of the city. And if you know anything about brewing, it's very water intensive. So this was a fantastic deal for him. Soon after that, he meets his wife, a woman named Olivia. They get married. They actually end up having 21 children together. Only 11 grew to adulthood, tragically. Poor Olivia, also having 21 children. Only 11 grew to adulthood, tragically. But that was kind of, that era, that time. They were very philanthropic as the brewery grew. They were very philanthropic to the city of Dublin, donating things like St. Stephen's Greens, several other properties, donating to Trinity College. So they really became a staple of the community as they grew this brewery. But as I said earlier, when they first started brewing, they wouldn't have been brewing um, porters or stouts. They were brewing Irish red ales. It wasn't actually until the late 1700s, 1790s, where Arthur Guinness and his son, Arthur Guinness II, kind of see what's going on over in London and decide to throw their hat into that ring and start brewing porters and stouts. And this is the maturation vats that I spoke of earlier. I think this is a fantastic photo. These are actually maturation vats at the Guinness Brewery. Some of these vats still stand to this day. And we've actually used wood from these vats to mature anniversary and special limited time only beer releases. So we'd actually mature Irish red ales and stouts on top of the wood of these vats just a few years ago. But these are the vats that porter would have been in up to 3 months. And you can see another picture of that vat house. And the great thing about beer, it could become this big industrial concern even before the Industrial Revolution, because as long as you have gravity, meaning your first steps of your brew process are in the highest part of the brewery and your packaging is at the lowest part of the brewery, then you can grow your brewery larger and larger. You don't need steam engines. You don't need any kind of machinery. And these men, the Coopers of Guinness, they built these vats. So early 1800s, they really throw their hat into the ring. They dedicate themselves to stouts and porters, and they brew kind of the first beer that they would be known for in that category, which was called Guinness West Indies Porter. So on this slide, you can see a repro of that bottle about, I'd say, 7 or 8 years ago. We actually re-released a modern version of Guinness West Indies Porter. Guinness West Indies Porter opened up the world to Guinness. And in fact, Guinness was very lucky. It was almost serendipitous where he bought that brewery at St. James's Gate in Dublin. Eventually, he'd have two canals right near the brewery. The River Liffey is right near the brewery as well, and he has access to the ocean. Because of this, he has access to the rest of the city, the rest of the country, and the rest of the world. He brews this beer, West Indies Porter, with his son, Arthur Guinness II, in 1801. And this beer really takes over the world. A similar story, if you've heard the story of IPA, higher hop rate, higher alcohol content, they can make a longer journey. Same thing with these beers. Alcohol, natural antiseptics, hops, natural antiseptic. So these beers can keep longer, hold their flavor. This beer was shipped out to Africa, the Caribbean, Jamaica, Southeast Asia, and the United States. West Indies Porter would have been the first Guinness to have arrived in the United States. In fact, we know exactly when it happened. It was shipped in 1817. 8 hogsheads of Guinness was shipped to a gentleman named John Heavey in South Carolina. We know that because we have the receipts in the Guinness archives. And a hogshead isn't a hog's head. It's not an animal's head filled with beer. That'd be atrocious. It's a giant wooden barrel about the size of 2 American kegs, 2 American stainless steel kegs. So a significant amount of beer. And to put that in context, when that beer arrived here in 1817, Yuengling, oldest continuously operating brewery in the country, started brewing in 1826, I believe. So people were enjoying Guinness in the United States longer than the oldest continuously operating brewery has been in the United States at this point, which is really cool. We have a long history with this beer. That beer, West Indies Porter, eventually actually evolved into a beer that we still have on the market to this day, Guinness 4 and Extra Stout. Guinness 4 and Extra Stout is 7.5% alcohol by volume. It's a big, robust, carbonated stout. I really highly recommend you seek it out. It has notes of toasted bread, espresso, Mexican stone ground chocolate, dark fruit on the back end. It's a really luxurious, enjoyable beer. Hugely popular in Nigeria. They brew it in Nigeria. We have a large brewery in Nigeria. They actually think of it as their local beer there. Hugely popular in the Caribbean. It's actually our #1 selling beer worldwide still to this day. To kind of go off topic a bit, the 5 biggest Guinness drinking countries per capita are Ireland, Nigeria, the UK and Cameroon kind of flip-flop depending upon the year, and then the United States. So I'm doing everything in my power to get into that, third or second spot. I hope you guys will help me as well. So the other beer that they brewed during the same time period was the beer that would eventually turn into Guinness Extra Stout, which you can see on the other side of this slide. That started off as a beer called Guinness Superior Porter. And Arthur Guinness wrote the recipe for that beer in 1821. And you can see the call out to quality in the name of that beer, Guinness Superior Porter, which is a drumbeat that we still march to this day. That beer was more made for the rest of Ireland. It's what we would call a country porter. But eventually it did see a fair amount of export. And in the early 1900s, this would have been the beer that was wildly popular in the United States as well. So because of those two beers, this brewery really grows. And at this point, most of our beer is being consumed, or all of our beer is being consumed out of bottles or casks. And most of it out of bottles. And our distributors and the publicans that bought the beer typically were the people who were going to bottle that beer. And what they would do is they would put their own label on it, which is fantastic because now we have this archive of all these beautiful old Guinness labels that you can see here in this slide. The problem with that was when these beers became really popular, people started to make inferior porters and stouts, and they brewed counterfeit Guinness. They'd slap a Guinness label on there, and people would drink it, and it was bad for the brand. It didn't represent who Guinness was because they were obsessed with quality. They were obsessed with that brewing process. So because of this, what they ended up doing is creating a trademark label. So they actually first started using this in 1862. It wasn't used as a trademark until 1876. It's the world's second trademark, the world's first trademark being the Bass Triangle, that red triangle for Bass. So we have beer to thank for trademarks. So what they did was they used a label that would be very hard to copy. So they have three things on this label that we still use to this day. Number one, they have Arthur Guinness's signature. Then they have the Liffey lines. So you can see those wavy lines going across the center of that bottle. Those are called the Liffey lines. They're meant to emulate the River Liffey. And then they have that beautiful harp device filled with Celtic knots. This label was intricate enough that people couldn't really counterfeit it. And we had a gentleman named Guinness World Travelers that would go all around the world to our different markets. They'd mail back market insights, and they'd also record in what ways were people enjoying Guinness and what was the quality of the Guinness like? Were they finding any counterfeit Guinness or anything like that? Now, the reason why Guinness decided to use this harp is back then in the 1800s, the harp was a big symbol and still is a big symbol for Celtic pride. So if we go way back to tribal Celtic society, they had an oral history where they would pass down the history of their tribes through poetry, basically. And every group would have a bard. So the bard would memorize the entire history of his family and his tribe and the greater mythology of Ireland itself. And in special occasions, they would recite this history accompanied by harp music. So during the Celtic revitalization in the late 1800s that led up to and was part of that Easter Uprising in 1916, the harp became a big symbol for Ireland. When you see some of the old flags of the Irish Republic, like the green flag with the gold harp on it, they're pulling from that same inspiration. Now, we trademarked this in the 1870s. So when you look at official documents from the Irish government, passports, official government papers, currency, coins, you'll notice they have a very similar harp, but it faces in the opposite direction of the Guinness harp as to not impinge on the Guinness trademark. Now, this harp was actually based off of an actual existing harp that you can go visit at Trinity College in Dublin. If you go to the Long Hall, which is kind of like their library of antiquities, the Brian Boru harp is on display there. The Brian Boru harp is one of the oldest existing Celtic harps. Historians believe that it was probably built in the 1700s, even though it's named after Brian Boru. And you can go and see that. And that's what this harp is based off of. That's what the harp on official Irish government documents is based off of. The Guinness family actually did come into possession of an old Celtic harp as well in the 1960s, and that's the downhill harp. So if you go to the Guinness storehouse and you want to see one of these traditional Celtic harps, they have the downhill harp on display on the marketing level of the Guinness storehouse, which is really cool. And you can see here over the years, this logo, this trademark has obviously changed and gotten more streamlined. We're getting back to where we're adding more detail and it's a little bit more rich, which I'm happy about because the 2005 one looks like it needs a little bit of love, in my opinion. So I'm glad that we're back to a little bit more detail. So because of those two beers, Guinness Superior Porter, which would evolve into Guinness Extra Stout, Guinness West Indies Porter, which would evolve into Guinness Foreign Extra Stout. We grow, we grow, we grow. Guinness goes public, and they become one of the largest breweries in the world. In fact, by the end of the 1800s, they were the largest brewery in the world. And I use this image from our archives, which is often referred to lovingly as the pyramids of Dublin, the Guinness cooperage yard, to demonstrate just how large this operation was. All those barrels were handmade by Guinness employees in the Guinness cooperage yard. Another fun early connection that we had to Guinness here in the United States is all these barrels are white American oak. Same barrels that you use for Kentucky bourbon, single-use white American oak, which is fantastic. Here's an aerial sketch of the brewery at the time. Again, 64-acre property. At this time, it was referred to as a city within a city, and it really was. This brewery had their own apartment buildings, almost dormitories that employees could stay at if they wished. They had their own hospital. They had their own newspaper. They had their own theater because there was a theater group within the employees. They had their own ships. They had their own barges. They had their own cooperage yard. They had their own stables and horses. They actually had their own railway system. They invented a single gauge railway that would move on a corkscrew to deliver ingredients from the top of the brewery down to the lower levels of the brewery. And the reason why they did it on a corkscrew is they didn't want it to take up so much space on an incline. So they actually invented that for the brewery. It really, truly was a city within a city. And still to this day, it's a huge property at St. James's Gate. And the great thing that Guinness did is they never tore down a brew house. So we're actually on our fourth brew house with the modern brewery. But breweries 1 through 3 are still standing on that property. Now, you know, some of the equipment's been gutted out and used for other things. Some of the vats have been gutted out and used for other things. But a lot of that's still standing. And if you ever get kind of a behind the scenes tour of the brewery, you can actually, you know, kind of feast your eyes on some of these structures in old brew houses, which is really cool and interesting. Some of them are actually used, like the employees will park their bikes in them and things like that. So early 1900s, Alexander Ford Watson is hired as the first Guinness Research Laboratory head. And this is a continuation of a culture dedicated to brewing science. From the very beginning, Guinness was adopting all the new brewing technology it could get its hands on. First adopters, when the hydrometer was invented and you could measure the gravity of your beers and the efficiency of your brew house, they were one of the first to adopt that. A man named Daniel Wheeler in the UK invented what's known as the drum roaster. The drum roaster enables you to roast malt to very specific temperatures without burning or charring it. So they adopted that, and that really changed the trajectory of stout and porter forever, because now they have more control over the efficiency and flavor profile of their malts. And still to this day, we roast all of our own malt. Pardon me, I have a bit of a cold, so a couple of sips of tea every now and then. All right, back at it. So in 1901, you know, they open up this research laboratory that's dedicated to improving brewing science and improving beer quality. And that laboratory still exists to this day. It's actually called the Open Gate Brewery at St. James's Gate in Dublin. And you can go visit it. And they brew all new beers for the Dublin market. So your traditional Guinness, your Guinness Draft, your Extra Stout, your Foreign Extra Stout, your Smithwick's, your Harp, they're not brewing those beers. They're brewing IPAs. They're brewing wit beers. They're brewing sours. They're brewing alt beers. They're brewing, you name it. They're experimenting with that, and they're improving brewing science and brewing quality. And that's really the biggest differentiator when I think about Guinness and the things that make us stand out as a brand, it's our dedication to quality, both in the brewing process and in the pub, in the on-premise. It's our authenticity, and it's our history, it's our culture. So we've started in 1759. Now we're in the 1920s, and Guinness has never actually advertised. So we did have the trademark, which was labels on our bottles, but we never pulled an advertisement. The Guinness family believed that they brewed a high quality beer, people would search it out, they'd look for it, and they were right. They grew to be the largest brewery in the world